Right, well, without further ado, it is time to go through the papers, and I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio, oops, there he says, grabbing the papers, is Albie Amankona, who, of course, is political commentator and founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Albie, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, thank you very much indeed for joining us at this unearthly hour. I do appreciate that 6 o'clock, or just after 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, is not necessarily the most palatable of time for one to be up and about, but you have done it, and for that, obviously, we're extremely grateful. But we're also extremely grateful for the fact that you are about to go through the newspapers, or as rather you have gone through the papers for us. And let's obviously start off. There's two stories all over the front pages today, as I've already alluded to. We'll go through those front pages in a moment. But Tory rebels, basically this is off the back of, obviously, the by-election defeats. And what are the rebel Tories saying?
Well, what aren't the rebel Tories saying, I think, is actually the more interesting question, especially when we think about actually the resignation letter of Oliver Dowden, which obviously we saw yesterday, which I think was actually more interesting for what it didn't say rather than what it did say. You know, when we have seen cabinet ministers resign in the past, they always talk about sort of being thankful to have served in the government of the sitting Prime Minister, and that they're loyal to that Prime Minister, and so on and so forth. We didn't hear any of that in Oliver Dowden's resignation letter yesterday. He spoke about
if you haven't read it, by the way, it's an extraordinary letter. It's very, very cleverly worded.
It's very cleverly written. He talks about being loyal to the Conservative Party. He talks about someone needing to take responsibility, and that it can't go on with business as usual.
And that, by the way, was the most passive jab at the Prime Minister, clearly, where he says someone needs to take responsibility. So he's not even suggesting that he, as in Oliver Dowden, is taking responsibility. What he's actually very cleverly said, someone, namely the leader, needs to take responsibility for what has happened in those two by-election defeats, and one of them, of course, historic.
Precisely. I mean, this is Oliver Dowden. You know, he has historically been one of the most loyal cabinet members to Boris Johnson, both during his time as Culture Secretary and more recently as the chairman of the party. And in fact, back in 2019, I believe it was Oliver Dowden, Robert Jenrick and Rishi Sunak who were sort of three of the people who were really instrumental to Boris Johnson's leadership campaign. Robert Jenrick is no longer a member of the cabinet. Oliver Dowden is no longer a member of the cabinet. So really there is only Rishi left from those up-and-coming Tories who are sitting in the cabinet. I think all eyes now are on the cabinet for if there are going to be any more resignations, because I think that is really going to be the main thing that might get Boris out of number 10.
Now, Albie, as I said in my introduction, obviously, you're founder of Conservatives Against Racism. This week feels like a very bad week to be aligned to the Conservative Party. So what is your personal feeling about everything that is going on?
It's been a really difficult week, and actually I was actually quite sad yesterday when I was thinking about the current state of affairs. You know, around this time last year, we won the Hartlepool by-election from Labour. It was sort of as a high for the party. Keir Starmer hadn't really turned things around. We were still soaring in the polls. We'd had the vaccine rollout. Things were looking quite good for the Conservative Party. And just 1 year later, things really aren't looking very good.
They're horrendous. And let's not forget as well, I think we overlook that massive majority. Boris, when he took the election in 2019, and he managed to command a huge majority, one of which we have not seen for many, many years in this country. And it feels, frankly, unreal that we are now talking just a few years later. We're talking about what it was like. I feel like now it's reminiscent of the time when Margaret Thatcher was nearing the end of her tenure as Prime Minister. How has that happened so quickly?
It does feel a lot like that, and especially because the Prime Minister is abroad, whilst all of the rebels are manoeuvring against him at home, which is, of course, the conditions under which Margaret Thatcher fell, because, of course, she was in Paris, whilst all the rebels were manoeuvring against her. Now, he's away in Rwanda, and then he's going to be in Berlin, I believe, and I think he might also be going to Paris, but I'm not sure about that. So he's away for 9 days, whilst we've just lost these two by-elections. I actually think the Wakefield by-election is more significant than the Tiverton and Hodgson by-election.
Interesting, okay.
Because essentially the Wakefield by-election is a bellwether for the Red Wall, really, isn't it? And so I think what a lot of Conservative MPs, particularly Red Wall Conservative MPs, are thinking, well, if Wakefield can go, all of us can go. So I think that is actually probably more of a concern for Tory MPs at the moment, rather than a kind of a freak win for the Lib Dems in the south of England, which happens quite a lot in by-elections history.
Maybe, but they don't necessarily take those seats on a 30% swing, and that's what's staggering. You know, we are talking about the largest swing in by-election history, and that is absolutely nothing to be overlooked. You know, this is extraordinary. It is historic.
It is extraordinary, and it's not to say it should be overlooked, but I think it's much easier for the party to make the argument that it is a freak swing, and the Lib Dems tend to do quite well during by-elections when the Conservatives have been in power for a long time. We saw it in Chesham and Amersham. We saw it up in Shropshire as well. That was a big swing too. So I think that's the line that's coming out from the party. It's not to say it should be overlooked, but in terms of the red wall, where we really focused at the 2019 general election, and where we talk about this new electoral coalition which got us that massive 80-seat majority, I think that is probably more of a concern for Conservative MPs at this very point in time.
Well, Albie, OK, let's carry on looking through the papers. And who's classed as middle-aged?
This was a fun one in the Times magazine. So they've got a wonderful picture of George Clooney, Liz Hurley, and Daniel Craig is the new James Bond, of course, well, the old James Bond now. And it's the question of who are you calling middle-aged?
I was going to say, I don't want to ruin the ending for you, but...
and it's this question of who you're calling middle-aged, and they've got this whole feature where they're talking about who you're calling middle-aged. So they actually define middle-aged as between 45 and 65, which is probably more in line with what I think. But apparently some people say that middle-aged is between 38 and 54. What do you think?
38 and 54, wow, that's slightly worrying, because then that means I'm hurtling towards middle age. Well, look, let's put it this way. I think that middle age is actually sort of based on a number of factors. I don't believe it's just your numeric age, for starters. I think it's very much a mindset. I think it's how to work. For example, let's take television and radio, for example. Obviously, it's a medium that neither of us are unfamiliar with. And people's listening and viewing habits change as they get older, right? So I don't think that I would have been as engrossed by, say, maybe Question Time, for argument's sake, when I was younger as I am now. But that's because I have a particular interest in news and politics. Maybe in terms of listening habits, you know, I don't know whether or not I would have been that tempted to maybe tune into classical music when growing up, but I am now. So I think that middle age comes from possibly habits, dress sense perhaps, and then maybe also the physical age. So with that in mind, actually, mind you, some people say I was born middle-aged, to be honest. But actually, I think that, yes, if we look at it like that, then, look, average age has got to be what nowadays? 80, roundabout, maybe into the 80s perhaps. So yeah, let's say that maybe late 30s, early 40s is probably around middle-aged, I reckon. I
think late 30s, that makes me feel scared, because I'm only 10 years away from being 38. So I would probably say
I'm not, 45. So don't worry.
I would probably say 45 to 65 just out of personal interest. But they also have a whole list of things that make you middle-aged. If you find it almost impossible to eat meat and cheese, if you think oat milk is hilarious. Also some other ones down here, being unfamiliar with women's bodily issues and being fairly sure it's better that way, which maybe has led to some of these outcomes in the US. Well,
quite. Who only knows? We're going to carry on going through the papers with Albie Amankona. Well, good morning to you. This is the early breakfast show here on TalkTV. It's Phil Dave in for Cristo with you until 7 o'clock, and there's still quite a bit to squeeze in before the end of the show. I am joined in the studio by Albie Amankona, who is the founder of Conservatives Against Racism and also a political commentator. We are going through the papers, which we'll continue to do in just a moment. In the meantime, though, what we have been asking you this morning is how you react to the news that is pretty much all over the front pages. Over in America, the US Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade. That is, of course, the ruling that says that millions of women across the US have a legal right to an abortion should they choose to do so. That has been overturned. It is now state-decided if that is the case or not. And we've been asking you for your thoughts, and thank you very much indeed for how you have reacted so far. Jenny has texted in from Milton Keynes. She's texted 87222, made sure that she started her message with the word talk. And she says, Phil, how archaic that women may not control their own fertility. With world population expanding and competition for resources, why such stupidity? What about the woman's mental health while carrying an unwanted child? It won't be long before hand-wringers here are bleating murder and the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg rule in favour of the fetus. Well, Jenny, thank you very much indeed for that. I think that you speak for a lot of people today. A lot of people have made very similar comments, although I have to suggest that most of the comments have indeed come from men. So anyone who is out there who actually can talk from a position of experience, we would love to hear from you this morning. 0344 499 1000. You can also text 87222, start your message with the word talk, and also tweet at TalkTV or at Mr. Phil Dave. Albie, let's continue to look through the papers. And Glastonbury, we cannot ignore the fact that the world's biggest mud festival is occurring at the moment. And what is making the headlines as far as Glastonbury is concerned this year?
Well, I've got what they call Glasto FOMO, because this is the first time I've not been to Glastonbury after the pandemic, and I'm very envious of all of my friends who were there.
How many times have you been then?
So I've been to Glastonbury 3 times, and it is... I've had some of the best days of my life at that festival, which is why I was actually very annoyed the other week when Sir Lenny Henry said he thought it was odd that there weren't enough black and brown faces at Glastonbury, implying somehow that it was racist. It is possibly the least racist place in the world. Everyone's there to have a good time and have fun and listen to all of their favourite artists. So I was unhappy with Sir Lenny Henry for that.
Albie, can we talk about that actually for a moment? Because I wasn't going to bring that up. I didn't know you were going to either. But there is something that's quite uncomfortable about the day and age in which we live, where everything has to boil down to the colour of someone's skin and whether or not we are balancing the scales. Now, I'm going to be honest, people might not realise that I am from a minority background myself. OK, fair enough. I am white, as you can see very clearly. But in terms of religion, I am from a minority background. And I don't remember the last time that I looked at either a festival, television, something like that, and thought, I wonder how many people are on there who are like me. But I might be very naive when it comes to stuff like that. But how do you feel about it, when everything seems to boil down to making sure that we're balancing those scales?
I think something's gone a little bit wrong, because I always understood that the goal of society when it came to equality and being anti-discrimination was to get to a society where these things didn't matter, where it didn't matter if you were black, where it didn't matter if you were gay or if you were a woman or if you came from a religious minority. What mattered was whether you were a good person, whether you were good at what you did, and the content of your character. And that's what Martin Luther King used to say. It's about the content of your character, not the colour of your skin. And when all of that feeds into Glastonbury, which is undeniably a positive, happy event where everyone's there to have fun, and essentially, really, it is people choosing to go and see their favourite artists, and there might be people from certain backgrounds who are more into rock music or reggae music, and they choose the festivals that they want to go to based upon their musical choice, and there might be some cultural factors that make people prefer certain types of music, and so you see certain types of people at certain types of festivals.
See, rightly or wrongly, I've always thought that there are two things in this world that can easily unite us rather than divide. Sports being one of them, and music being the other. Now, I know that music is subjective, obviously, don't get me wrong, I appreciate that not everyone likes the same music, but the point is that certain types of music can appeal to all different types of people, and it just seems very wrong somehow to tarnish the Glastonbury Festival, which look, is not for me. I have made it very clear on air and off air that Glastonbury is not my thing at all. I am far too anti-mud for anything along those lines. However, if people do take some sort of pleasure out of it, I would like to think that it's the perfect event, basically, for someone to not look at what divides us. It's more about what unites us, I would have thought.
Exactly, it's all about what unites us. I mean, there are some fantastic artists playing there this year. Billie Eilish became the youngest headliner to headline Glastonbury, I think it was last night, just 20 years old. She even makes me feel old. Also,
well, I mean, I tell you how I know I'm old. I don't even know who Billie Eilish is. I think the first time I heard her name was, didn't Billie Eilish do the latest Bond theme?
She did do the latest Bond theme. She did the latest Bond theme. Not my favourite Bond theme, though, I might add. But, of course, Also, at Glastonbury Festival this year, we had President Zelensky address the crowd, and he got a very good reception, obviously via video link. We also have the Kalush Orchestra, who won Eurovision just a couple of weeks ago, who are going to be performing at Glastonbury. So this is a festival which unites people, and we don't need to be focusing on what divides people.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of something that hopefully will unite us, Wimbledon is around the corner. There is a much furore at the prospect of seeing US Open champion Emma Raducanu playing there. But Emma Raducanu might be making the headlines for other reasons today. Not necessarily in a bad way.
Yes, well, absolutely in a good way. She's had a difficult year with injuries, so I wish Emma all the very best with Wimbledon. But she's also, her grandmother reveals in the Daily Mail, been offered a place at Cambridge University to study economics. So she's not just a tennis pro, she's not just absolutely beautiful, but she's also one of the cleverest people in the world. And, you know, all of those people that have just all of the boxes ticked for life going well for them can be a little bit annoying sometimes, but I wish her the very best of luck.
There is something so unbelievably shocking how some people have it all.
Literally.
So, but don't get me wrong, we're very happy for her, and jealousy is indeed a vile emotion that we would never encourage here at TalkTV. Albie Amankona, thank you very much.